everybody and welcome to the Flute Practice. Today we are going to be looking at some of my favorite practice tips. These tips are specifically useful for some of those really nasty, niggly little bits that we have to practice in our pieces. So let's go check it out. Now, there are some kind of like more usual or more known tips, and then there are those that maybe are slightly unusual, and I've included both of those in this video because sometimes we need reminding of the, obvious things, and sometimes we need something new and fresh. So the first thing I'm going to start off with is something that is a little bit new and fresh for maybe some of you, and that is practicing backwards. Yes, that's right, practicing backwards. Now, there's kind of like two parts to this. On the one hand, to actually start at the back of a piece or back of a tricky section and start from the end of it, especially when you have these like page-long runs that just go on and on and on. Not to always start at the beginning, but to actually start at the end and start working there. The other thing is to actually physically play the passage backwards. I don't know what it is, but it kind of like, I don't know, it like messes with your mind. It's so tricky that your mind by the end of it plays it forwards again, and it's like, that's so much easier. Often the strategies for practice that are so useful are these kind of like making it more difficult than it actually is. And then you play the actual thing and you're like, it's so much easier. So this I find is a very helpful strategy. I have done a whole video on this, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but practicing in our good old rhythms. So in different rhythms, whether it's dotted da 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 da, or there are variations of this. As I said, I'm going to link you to that video. You can go check it out. But do this with a metronome. It's really, really, really important because once you have that beat that's really anchoring you, you can really learn to control your fingers. And also make sure you do this slowly. I'm going to say this for everything. Once again, do practice all of this stuff as slowly as you can in the beginning. The slower and the more accurate you are in the beginning, the faster and more accurate it'll become later. A really interesting little technique that I learned a few years back was to change the grouping of the music you're playing. So I am going to demonstrate this just to kind of show you how this would work. So I'll grab my flute. So say I have a little passage that goes like this. Is the passage, okay? I'm double tonguing it. And if I want to practice it in different groupings, I might practice. So I am practicing doing grouping 3, 2, 3, and then getting this quite a lot faster. So almost. It's quite kind of like tricky for the brain to start like grouping it in different ways, but once again, we're making it more difficult than it is, which is really, really, really helpful. Another kind of passage, by the way, I'm busy playing from the Reinecke Sonata. It's a piece that I'm busy practicing at the moment. The second movement is a lot of like tricky little runs and difficult stuff. So it's very useful to use this. So this little bit, for example, you might want to practice putting the beat. It actually starts in an offbeat, but you might want to practice putting it on the downbeat. So for example, instead of the original, which is, it's very, very helpful to play around with the groupings and also play around with where you're putting the heavy beats and the light beats. One of the really kind of classic ways to practice something is just changing the articulations. Now, there are many ways to do this. One of my personal favorite ways to do this is, especially in staccato passages like this, to kind of increase the number of tonguings on each note. So I might do double tonguing, two knocks on each note. And then carry on, do 3. And then 4. And so on and so forth until you're kind of doing so many that you can't actually like hold onto it anymore. And then you go back to the single tonguing and you will feel such a difference. You can also do this on ha. So I do as many tongues as I can, then I do it on ha. And then add the normal tongue. And already I just feel everything becomes a little bit crisper. When you really give this a bit of like dedicated time, it's a really, really, really helpful little technique. And you happen to be learning the fingers at the same time, which is really great and really helpful. Now, no discussion on how to master tricky passages and how to practice them is complete without looking at mental rehearsal. I am going to do an entire video just on mental rehearsal because it is so incredibly important. And I think it is important for us to develop some strategies on how to do this. You know, it's all very good and well being like, oh, well, you must just mentally rehearse, but like, how do we actually do this? So one of the things that I'm just going to mention here very briefly is to really imagine your fingers playing the notes of the tricky passage without actually playing it or even moving your fingers. It's quite tricky, but if you can do that, if you're that clear about it in your head, then you really know that you know it. And after a while, your brain kind of gets used to like almost like patterns of how it feels to play certain notes and certain finger combinations. And it gets really exciting because it means you can start practicing your pieces everywhere. Like I'm regularly practicing things like E to F, just that movement from F sharp to E. I'm regularly just like mentally rehearsing that in my head, just that movement and the accuracy of that movement. I mean, there's studies to show the amazing like possibility and power in this. So I'm not even going to try and defend it. I think go research it if you don't believe me, but it really is incredibly powerful. I'm going to jump to the first movement for this next little technique, and that is a technique which involves adding notes systematically to a run. So what you do, and I think it's really great to start from the back because usually we kind of start a run okay, and then towards the end of the run we kind of lose our nerve. So I'm going to just jump to the first movement, and there's this little passage where we kind of have to do this going up quite swiftly. So what I like to do, you can even really note for note. So first just adding just to the G from F sharp to G. Then the note before that, E, F, G. Then D, E, F, G. And making sure each time it's really clean and smooth. Then the next one. And trying to keep it in rhythm. Once again, it's actually quite important to try and stay in that rhythm or to try and keep it to speed if you can. And then full. And so on and so forth. Adding bits at a time. This is really, really, really helpful for those like quick little up runs that we often have. Those kind of things. Just because we're really checking what we're doing, especially in the top bits of those runs where we often kind of lose the plot a little bit. So really, 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 very useful. Another really useful technique is to kind of take a little run or a little passage, or even just the combination of fingers that you're struggling with in that passage, and to play them over and over again in a kind of a loop. So trying to see if I can find a spot like this, or even to go, so I'm going to do this with this little bit once again in the second movement, and you can go up and down the run, so backwards and forwards, but kind of creating a little loop for yourself. So that you're creating kind of a loop and just practicing those finger combinations, really making sure you know what you're doing there. I find this very useful. Often, if I can't do this, I can't play the run, whereas if I can do that, I usually can play the run. At least I can play it more smoothly. So just practicing going over it like that, very, very helpful little technique. The last really useful little technique is to change and mess around with your metronome speed. So if you are playing a piece, mess around, try it faster, try it slower, and don't necessarily, you can incrementally speed it up. So you start at a slow speed and you bit by bit increase it. That's a really great strategy as well. But more than that, even sometimes really like messing around with the speed completely. So do it quite quickly and then go really slowly again, and then go faster and kind of mess around backwards and forwards with this. I actually find this incredibly helpful. Especially when you know it quite well, but you just kind of adding those final polishing touches to it to just make sure you can play it in different speeds. And of course, this is very useful when you are actually coming together with other musicians, whether it's a pianist or an orchestra or whatever it might be, to make sure that you really know the piece in different speed, because sometimes it happens you have like one rehearsal and you know the orchestra are playing it like 15% slower than you've ever practiced it, and suddenly you're completely thrown off. So it's really useful to be so prepared that you can play it in whatever speed they kind of throw at you. All right, everybody, those were just a few little tips and tricks that I like to use. I'm sure I'm probably going to like think of 100 more when I finish this video. It always kind of happens that way. But I would love for you guys to comment below and share some of your little tricks. I always love to learn from you guys. It's really, really, really so wonderful and a huge part of my own growing learning process. So please never feel shy to send me messages and emails and comments and all sorts. Until then, everybody, happy practicing and see you next time.